Dear folks, this is the third video lecture on A Pale View of Heroes, written by Kazuo Ishiguro, born in Japan, who got the Nobel Prize of Literature 2 years ago. And last week, I talked about different aspects of the novel, including the narrative perspective, including character, including the structure, the difference between the story and the plot. Also, the theme, the author's social vision, the author's worldview. And for this lecture, I would like to start with setting, a novel's setting. Usually when we talk about setting, we usually refer to the time of the novel, of the action, of the events, of what happened in the story. And then also the place where the story took place, where the event happened. And in the beginning of the novel, we know that the story took place in two countries, one in Japan, one in England. Or we could say it's a tale of two cities, referred to Nagasaki in Japan and London in England. Nagasaki actually, refer to the main character, the protagonist's past life, the past. So Nagasaki, in a sense, represents the past. London, or more accurate, is the suburban area of London, the country house where a school stays, represents the present. So you could say the story combines the present and the past, or the story tries to make some kind of comparison between the past and the present. And in a sense, as I argue in our previous lectures, that the story can be regarded as Ezuko's effort to negotiate with the past. Or you could argue the novel itself is Ezuko's memory of things past. To use Marshall Proust's term, it's remembrance of things past. In other words, it's Ezuko's memoir. Okay, so the story in the past, the story in Japan, took place in Nagasaki. Then, as a reader, we might wonder why the author in particular set the story in Nagasaki. For one very simple reason. You could say, oh, Nagasaki, because Ishiguro himself, the author himself, was born in Nagasaki. That's true. So A Pale View of Heroes is Ishiguro's very first novel. So in this very first novel, you could say the author used Nagasaki as a setting because he tried to show his homage, his respect to the very place where he was born. But don't forget, historically, Nagasaki is also important. You remember in the year 1945, Japan surrendered in the Asia-Pacific War. Surrender. Why? Because of the attack of two atomic bombs. One fell in Hiroshima, the other in Nagasaki. There is a reason why today, when we talk about the atomic bomb, we always think about Nagasaki, we always think about Hiroshima. So in particular, Nagasaki is important because it was the second city in Japan, or the only two city, one of the only two cities in the whole world that was attacked by an atomic bomb. So this is the time, this is the place. So as a reader, we might wonder, born in Nagasaki himself, did the author try to use this kind of setting, his own city, to express his sense of regret for what the Japanese had done to the world at large in the Second World War? This is something, worthy of our deep thinking. So Nagasaki, but time, when was the story set? When did the story take place? You remember Ezuko at that time had a Japanese husband. Then for some reason they had a divorce because of the husband's work attitude, or because the husband had no affection for her, or because she found that she was simply very different from her husband in terms of their value system, in terms of their temperament. We don't know. In the story, we learn from the story that the husband named Jiro actually was a very dutiful husband. He was an engineer. He was the so-called bread earner, 赚取生活费养家的 the bread winner, earner for the family. So how come Ezuko decided to divorce the husband? Could it be possible that they have very, very different value system? Or could it be possible that Ezuko met an English gentleman while the marital relationship continued? We don't know, but obviously Ezuko met the second husband in Nagasaki, in Japan. So this brings us another question. Why there were many American soldiers, British soldiers, soldiers from the West coming to Japan at that time? My point is, when exactly is the time that the story takes place? If you are a careful reader, you come to realize the story took place during the time of the Korean War. Don't forget, the Korean War started around 1950 and lasted for about 4 years. Because of the war, so the United States, after the surrender of Japan, tried to re-establish or rebuild Japan as a new country. Because the United States and other Western allies at that time were fighting against communists, against today's North Korea, against today's communist China, against Russia, at that time called Soviet Russia. So it's a war between two different camps. On the one hand, the democratic camps led by the United States. On the other hand, the communist camp led by Russia, Soviet Union. Okay? So bear in mind, when the story take place, where the story takes place. So just give you some idea how come Nagasaki is important, how come the Korean War is important. And if you bear in mind the so-called setting, you come to realize actually when the story happens, when the story begins, Japan at that time actually was a changing society. In other words, the society was undergoing some kind of transition, some kind of change. So easy for us to find two different generations of characters in the story. So you could argue, in the story, we encounter two generations of Japanese, or two different sets of value system. On the one hand, if we are talking about the present or the modern generation, we remember Jiro, even Etsuko herself, and Jiro's good friend, classmate. They all represent the new generation, the modern generation. Whereas Jiro's father, Etsuko's father-in-law, Otaka-san in the story. And of course, there are some other major characters in the story who can all represent the past, the old Japan. So you see in this story the conflict between two Japans, the conflict between the old Japan and the new Japan. And because the society was changing, because it was a transitional society, so as a character like Etsuko, like Jiro, they might find it very difficult to adjust themselves to a new and changing society. So this has something to do with the setting of the novel. And of course, after the setting, I also mentioned a little bit about this. The author's worldview, social vision. In other words, what does the author try to say in the novel? You could argue it's Etsuko's story. Okay? So if you read the novel as Etsuko's story, you could say Etsuko tried to negotiate her past. She suffered a lot because of her unpleasant past. And she needs to negotiate with the past in order to live in peace, in order to have a peaceful, easy mind. And you know, Etsuko and the youngest daughter, Nikki, both had developed a very strong sense of guilt over the death of Keiko, over the way they treat Keiko when Keiko was still alive. So this is one reading of the novel. Try to read a pale view of hers as Etsuko's story, as her negotiation with the past, by telling her own story to the younger daughter. She feels her sense of guilt is reduced. In this sense, we can also argue the overall theme of the novel is storytelling as a kind of cure, as a kind of therapy, or writing as a therapy. And we also mention, in the story, it's a changing society, not just a transition from old Japan to new Japan. We also realize it's an introduction of new Western value system, especially the American system of democracy to Japan. So we could also argue, it's, in a sense, the conflict between the two generations is a conflict between, the West and the East. The West represented by the United States, the East represented by Japan. So it's a conflict between two different sets of value system. And we also talk about identity. Identity. So you can also argue this novel is a search for identity. Who is searching for identity? Obviously, Nikki is searching for identity. Obviously, Keiko is searching for identity. Keiko, at the end, commits suicide, kill herself, because she came to realize in England, she was a stranger. She was a stranger even at her own home. Just because she had a half sister born by the same mother with an English gentleman. She had a stepfather, an English gentleman, who actually tried to romanticize the East. So she suffered a lot, over the issue of identity, over the issue of nationality. And when Keiko moved to England along with the mother, actually, Keiko was pretty young. About the age of Mariko in the story, I argued before, you could read the story told by Etsuko about Sachiko and Mariko as Etsuko's her own story. So, in this sense, you could argue Etsuko actually is Sachiko in disguise. And then Keiko is Mariko in disguise. What happened between Sachiko and Mariko, between the mother and the daughter, the relationship between the mother and the daughter, actually was what happening to Etsuko and Keiko. We come to realize Sachiko as a mother was not very devoted, was not very dutiful. Actually, Sachiko often ignore the needs of Mariko. So Mariko turned out to be a problematic child. She did make a lot of trouble. For the mother, she was not well behaved. She was strange in a sense. But who caused her to behave in that manner? You could argue it's because of the mother, because of Sachiko. Later on, I'm going to point out the passage why Mariko suffered so much, all because of the mother. The same with Keiko and Etsuko. So if you try to read, Etsuko and Keiko, you can read the story. Etsuko told about the mother and the daughter, Sachiko and Keiko. And then after the theme, after the author's worldview, then there are several important characters in the novel. In our previous lecture, I already mentioned several important characters, but here we have several more, and they are quite important, like Ogata-san. And I mentioned Ogata-san in the story obviously represents the old Japan, the old generation of Japan. And the old value system of all Japan. So Ogata-san actually is very typical of the previous generation, of the old generation of the Japanese. And don't forget, in the story, we learn that Ogata-san actually was a school teacher. Why a school teacher? Why the author includes school teacher here? Does he want to say Japan eventually went to the war or started a war in Asia Pacific? Or because of the ideology young children learn from the old generation? Did he try to attack the so-called Japanese militarism at that time? 军国主义. So this is what Ogata-san represents. And then I mentioned Jiro, Ogata-san's own son. In the story, he's an engineer. And Jiro has a good classmate, has a good friend called Shigio Masuda. Actually, he is also Ogata-san's student. And in the story, we come to realize Shigio Masuda and Jiro, who represent the new Japan, the new generation, did say something very harsh, very critical, very negative about Ogata-san. And if you read the story well enough, you come to realize Ogata-san visit the son, the daughter-in-law, for a very simple reason. He tried to find out Shigio Masuda through the help of Jiro, just because the student Shigio did write an article criticizing the teacher Ogata-san and his generation for what they had done to Japan. So again, with these two characters, and there are a lot of passages. I quote all the page number here for you to read more about the conversation between Shigio and Ogata-san. Through their conversation, you can see two sets of different value systems and the conflict of these two value systems. Another important character is Mrs. Fujiwara. We learn from the story before the war, she had a very, wealthy, good family, but all her family died of the war. She was the only one left after the war. So what is emphasized in the story is Mrs. Fujiwara suffers the most because of the war. And after the war, in order to survive, to make his living, she owns a noodle shop. And she happened to be a good friend of Etsuko. And later on, when Sachiko approached Etsuko for help to find some art job for her, she then approached Fujiwara for help. So actually, Sachiko did work for Fujiwara in her noodle shop. But what is emphasized in the story about this character, this woman, is actually Fujiwara stands for the spirit of looking forward, of optimism. In other words, even though she suffered the most during the war, she is not pessimistic. Instead, she is always encouraging all the friends around her to look forward. Don't lose their heart, in particular to Etsuko, Ezuko, I think, in the story, you can feel Ezuko is a little bit melancholy, especially at that time she was pregnant. She was big with, the future Keiko. So Ezuko was a little bit melancholy, a little bit, sad over, the future child, over the future Japan. And Fujiwara was always encouraging, always urging, advising, encouraging Ezuko to look ahead, look forward. So I think the author, create this woman just to emphasize during the time of sadness, during the time of devastation, the time of grief, try to look at the bright side of humanity. Try to look forward toward the future. So there are several important characters, and these three in particular are very important in the story. And there are many passages in the book that refer to these three major characters. And then actually, another thing we like to talk about is Sachiko in the story always talk about to leave for America, to depart for America. In the story, we realize Sachiko cannot take good care of Mariko, of her girl, because every day she was very busy with dating her boyfriend, Frank, an American soldier in the story. Frank always promised to take Sachiko and Mariko to the United States to start a new life. And because of this, dating relationship, so Sachiko was too busy to take care of Mariko. But don't forget, at that time, Japan was pretty much a very traditional society. Imagine you are Mariko, you are the girl who has a mother who goes dating every day with an American soldier. As a child, you could imagine the kind of peer pressure, the kind of mental pressure from her friends. So that's the reason why Mariko in the story is always very isolated, very lonely. And in one particular passage, when Ezuko asked Mariko to make friends with girls and boys, Mariko said that I could not make friends with boys and girls because they stole her pet cat. They even killed the cat. And then Ezuko pretend to be surprised. Why? Why did other boys and girls would take away your pet, would take away your cat, would kill your cat? Then Mariko, with tears in her eyes, said that because they said things about mother. What the boys and girls say about the mother, Sachiko? If you have good imagination, you could say, you could argue, obviously, other boys and girls would tease Mariko, saying her mother is a prostitute because the mother is dating with an American soldier. So the relationship between, the mother the American soldier Frank, and then Mariko. This kind of triangle relationship, okay, reflects the relationship between Ezuko herself, her own elder sister, Keiko, and then the English husband, the English, gentleman. So obviously, the triangle relationship actually is a reflection of Ezuko's own relationship with her future husband, with her own daughter. So bear in mind, the similarity. And as I said, actually, Ezuko is telling her own story. And this similarity is another good evidence of, the proof. Of course, Ezuko, as a friend of Sachiko, when she learned about the fact that Sachiko is going to take Mariko to the United States with her boyfriend, with Frank, Ezuko keep telling Sachiko, how about the girl? How about Mariko? Could she get good education in the United States? Was it fair to Mariko? Of course, Sachiko would always, tell Ezuko, don't worry about Mariko. Actually, I decided to take her to the United States with my boyfriend. It's all because of her. I care about her. I care about her education. But what happened in the story was just the opposite. So again, this brings back to our previous argument, okay? The conflict between two different sets of value systems, okay? And of course, as I mentioned in my previous, lecture, the story is told by Ezuko. Ezuko is the narrator, the storyteller. And we argue also because she tells the story and she herself is involved in the story. So this kind of narrative perspective is the so-called first-person narrator, first-person point of view. Then if we know that the story is told from the first-person point of view, a good question for us to ask is the narrator, is the storyteller trustworthy? Is he, in this case, is Ezuko a reliable storyteller? If we learn that Ezuko, the storyteller, is not a reliable storyteller, how could we, the readers, continue to read the story, continue to listen to her story? So obviously, Ezuko must assure the reader that she is telling the truth. She is 100% reliable narrator, reliable storyteller. But we know, because Ezuko is telling her own story, she could not be 100% honest, frank. How could she be? Because some part of her stories are less pleasant. If she tells those unpleasant events, those unpleasant stories, she could feel quite ashamed or even embarrassed. So she tried to avoid this sense of shame, this sense of embarrassment. But how how to solve this difficult issue. On the one hand, Etsuko needs to assure the reader that she is a reliable storyteller. She is telling the truth. On the other hand, she tried to hide, to conceal something that happened to her, something that was less pleasant or even unpleasant. So, in the very beginning of the story, actually, Etsuko starts to talk about memory, her memory. She kept telling the reader, if you come to discover that there are some incoherence, there are some, conflict in my narrative, please bear with me, please pardon me, because I am telling my story out of my memory, because I'm getting old, because memory through time will become hazy. Pale means not clear. Hazy means unclear. In other words, what I try to say is actually Etsuko in the story uses a lot of excuses to emphasize. She tells the whole story all because of her memory, and if the reader happened to discover any discrepancy, difference, conflict, then it's all due to or because of her poor memory. So there are many passages in the story that refer to this unreliable nature of memory. So you could argue Etsuko's argument for memory, Etsuko's discourse on memory, actually is her strategy of storytelling, her narrative strategy, 叙述的策略, to avoid telling anything that happened to her and that was unpleasant, that was less pleasant. So memory is another, key thing for us to remember. So that is the reason why, for the song of the beginning of the lecture, I play, memory from Cats. That's the reason why. Because the whole novel, talks about memory, the function of memory, the unreliability of memory. And in this sense, you could argue the whole book actually is Etsuko's memory, Etsuko's remembrance of things past, Etsuko's memory of things past, in a sense, Etsuko's memoir. Another important feature, another important, storyline in the novel is the so-called the dream, Etsuko's dream. Not just Etsuko had bad dreams during Niki's stay with her. Actually, Niki, the younger sister, also had bad dreams. You remember in the very beginning, actually, the second day of Niki's stay with the mother started to refer to her dream. She said, I had a dream. I dreamed about a girl playing on the swing. Niki, the daughter, by instinct, immediately detect what her mother was referring to. So if you read the story carefully enough, when the mother tried to tell the younger daughter that she had a bad dream, she dreamed about a girl playing on the swing. The daughter always tried to ignore her, not to pay any attention to her, because the daughter knows the kind of dream the mother had, the nature of the dream. The daughter, Nikki, know that her mother was referring to her dream of Keiko's death. In the story, we remember because of her unendurable sufferings, because of her, isolation from English society, because of cultural difference or cultural shock, Keiko eventually chose to kill herself in Manchester City. And then the mother, out of her sense of guilt, started to have her dream about a girl playing on a swing. Imagine the similarity between a picture playing on a swing and a picture of a girl hanging herself to death by using a rope. Okay, so that is the reason why the dream, version in the story, the dream part in the story, actually is so significant, is so important. And in this sense, we could argue not just the mother, Etsuko, but also the younger daughter, Nikki. Actually, they were both haunted by their dream about Keiko. You could argue Keiko or the dream serve more or less like Keiko's ghost. And actually, both the mother and the daughter, they were haunted by Keiko, by the ghosts of Keiko. In this particular sense, you can read this novel as a ghost story. Actually, the ghost story in Japan as well as in Chinese literature has had a long tradition. Okay, in Chinese literature, we all remember 聊斋志异. Actually, it's a collection of ghost story. In Japan, ghost story has also had a long literature tradition. So probably, Etsuko Iskura himself is using this kind of literary tradition from Japanese literature to show that he, back in bone himself, is a Japanese writer. We don't know, but that could be one of his, intentions by including this kind of ghost story in A Pale View of Heroes. I think you can easily find the evidence that A Pale View of Heroes is a ghost story. Actually, if we are referring to the same edition, you can check on page 174 to 175. One certain morning, very early, the mother heard some noise coming from the ground floor, from the first floor, from the kitchen. And she woke up and tried to see what was happening, thinking perhaps some burglar just entered into her house. But when she tried to see what was happening there, suddenly she found the younger daughter, Nikki, coming from the first floor upstairs, bringing a cup of coffee. And when the daughter the younger daughter, saw the mother, the daughter was taken by surprise because the daughter thought the mother was Keiko's ghost. The mother at the same time thought Nikki was Keiko's ghost. So if you refer to page 174 to 175, you will easily come upon the passages that talk about their fear, their being haunted by the ghost of Keiko. And it is only after this moment, in the following page, then we see the so-called the moment of illumination, the moment of realization, or a good term is the so-called epiphany, 顿悟, the epiphany of Nikki. Throughout the whole story, actually, Nikki didn't grow up, not until this particular moment. There, in that particular moment, she realized she was not fair when she treated her elder sister like a stranger in the family. And she also felt that her own father, Keiko's stepfather, was not kind to Keiko because Keiko was born by a Japanese father. So at that real moment, we could argue Nikki grew up, Nikki became mature, Nikki achieved her maturity. So that is the so-called awakening moment of sudden realization. And it is only after when she met with the mother, thinking the mother was Keiko's ghosts. So that is a very important moment in the book. Okay? And then I think before we finish this lecture, I mentioned already several important key issues in the book. For example, the past versus the present. Okay? Etsuko's past, Etsuko's present. The generation that belongs to the past and the generation of the present. And then the difference between the Easts and the Wests. Okay? Etsuko, Jiro, Okata-san represent the Easts. Frank, Etsuko's second husband, represent the Wests. So it's also a conflict between East and West, a conflict between past and present. And then I also mentioned at that time, Japan was a changing society. The society was undergoing some kind of transition, some kind of change. So you could argue the whole book deals with the difference or the conflict or the confrontation between the old generation and the new generation. And you can easily find, some characters, grouping them together as characters that represent the old generation and some representing the new generation. And also, another important aspect is the issue of tradition and change. How we can keep tradition in the context of transition, in the context of change. This is another big important issue. And eventually, identity issue has always been an important issue in this novel. And if you want to, refer to this important issue, you can refer to the following pages, like 59 to 60, 64 to 65, 66 to 67. And I think I'll keep this for next week. Actually, can we read a Pale View as a post-colonial novel? And what is meant by colonial and post-colonial. Some scholars, some readers might argue, even though it has nothing to do with imperialism in the book, but a POV of his could still be read as a post-colonial. And you need to bear in mind, when we talk about post-colonial, we should have colonial in mind. And the difference between colonial and post-colonial, if we refer to the point of view, it's the difference between the center and the margin, the central and the marginal, okay? And colonial literature or colonial literature obviously is written from the imperialist's point of view, whereas post-colonial literature is writing at the margin, okay? Just give you some idea about, colonial and post-colonial. And think about a POV of his in this context. Could we argue a POV of here as a post-colonial novel, okay? And because of post-colonial, then the issue of identity, the issue of language turned out to be two key issues when they refer to post-colonial, okay? Back to Ishiguro, born in Japan, a Japanese by birth, but he is writing in English. Okay, so back to this. Can we argue, a period of here is a post-colonial? So because of our time limit, I think this is for this lecture. Thank you.